Hidden origins of alcohol and why it's called a spirit. From ancient alchemical traditions to its place in today's world, alcohol carries a deep contradiction. It brings momentary escape, yet often clouds deeper awareness. That bottle on your shelf holds more than liquid. It holds a legacy tied to ancient mysticism and forgotten truths. Once you uncover the real meaning behind the word alcohol, it could shift your entire understanding of reality. The origin of the word alcohol comes from the Arabic term al-kuḥl, originally referring to a refined powder made from antimony, often used as eye makeup known as kohl. But in mystical symbolism, it meant more than a cosmetic. It was believed to sharpen spiritual vision, helping one perceive hidden realities beyond the visible. As language evolved, alcohol came to refer to the substance produced through distillation, a powerful essence drawn from matter, both physical and symbolic. This process of refinement became a metaphor for spiritual purification, where base materials, or the soul itself, could be transformed into something higher. In the world of alchemy, alcohol represents this very principle, turning the dense into the subtle, the raw into the pure. Just as physical distillation concentrates liquid into a potent form, spiritual alchemy refines the soul through experiences, pain, and inner work. Yet when this refined spirit is misused, as it often is through overindulgence, it replaces real transcendence with an illusion. It mimics the elevation that comes from deep spiritual connection, but ultimately distances us from it. The act of distillation mirrors the soul's passage through trials and transformation. In physical terms, it separates pure essence from impurities. In esoteric terms, it's the shedding of illusion to reveal truth. Alcohol, then, is a paradox, a product of refinement that, when consumed, often brings fragmentation. While the spiritual path seeks union with higher consciousness, alcohol typically pulls one into a fog, disconnecting the mind, body, and spirit. The shift in awareness it induces feels like freedom, but it's often a false version, a brief departure from worldly burdens rather than a true ascent of the soul. Rather than lifting us to spiritual clarity, alcohol tends to dim the inner flame. Real transcendence comes through consistent practices like meditation, prayer, or sacred movement, not from substances that distort reality. In mystical teachings, the soul is often described as light or flame, always yearning to reconnect with the divine source. But alcohol lowers the energetic frequency of both the mind and body, making it harder to align with higher vibrations. This effect becomes a spiritual barrier, separating the individual from their natural ability to connect with higher realms. The altered states produced by alcohol can feel liberating, but they're more like dreams than awakenings. They produce detachment, not elevation. Unlike mindful practices that expand consciousness, alcohol numbs it, keeping the soul tethered to denser planes of experience. Alcohol and the pineal gland. One of the most significant impacts of alcohol in mystical terms is on the pineal gland, known in spiritual traditions as the third eye. This center is considered the gateway to intuition, divine vision, and spiritual awareness. Regular drinking dulls the sensitivity of this gland, reducing the individual's capacity to perceive subtle energies or receive inner guidance. Rather than opening the door to higher wisdom, it slowly closes it, cutting the person off from their natural intuition and inner knowing. True spiritual practice is about increasing sensitivity and being fully present. It sharpens the ability to notice subtle shifts in energy, emotion, and awareness. But alcohol works in the opposite direction, dulling these senses and building walls between us and our higher self. Over time, this disconnection can lead to feelings of confusion, emotional heaviness, and spiritual stagnation. What once might have been a calling toward deeper purpose becomes a quiet background hum drowned out by distraction. The pursuit of clarity that fuels spiritual seekers becomes lost in a cycle of numbness and fleeting comfort. In Eastern traditions, alcohol is sometimes seen as a symbol of samsara, the repeating cycle of birth, death, and rebirth bound by suffering and attachment. Samsara is driven by craving, the desire to avoid pain and chase pleasure. Alcohol often plays directly into this loop. It offers short-term joy followed by emotional or physical lows, which in turn create the craving for more, feeding the cycle again. This mirrors the endless loop of samsara, seeking satisfaction in things that can never truly satisfy. The relief alcohol provides is fleeting, and when the effect fades, the soul often feels more lost than before, leading to repetition without true healing. Much like the karmic cycle, it can trap a person in patterns that prevent them from reaching spiritual liberation. At its root, humanity's craving for intoxication is actually a disguised hunger for transcendence. What we search for in a drink, a moment of peace, joy, or oneness, is a shadow of the spiritual connection we long for deep within. The soul is always seeking to reunite with the divine source, and alcohol temporarily simulates that connection by altering perception. But because it's a material substance, it can't truly fulfill that sacred longing. It acts as a counterfeit, providing a temporary illusion of elevation while anchoring the soul further into disconnection. Dependency replaces discipline, numbness replaces insight, and the deep inner work needed for awakening is bypassed by a quick escape. True transformation requires effort, intention, and time, qualities that alcohol sidesteps, offering a shortcut that leads in the wrong direction. Spiritual awakening, then, is about recognizing this misplaced desire and redirecting it inward. Practices like breathwork, chanting, meditation, and sacred devotion can bring about the same bliss people unconsciously seek, but in a way that builds strength instead of dependence. These disciplines allow us to access the real source of joy and unity, no longer needing external substances to feel whole. When this shift happens, the cycle of addiction becomes a path toward freedom. The soul remembers its purpose, and the energy that once fed disconnection is now used for healing and elevation. So while alcohol has roots in refinement and transformation, its misuse often leads to energetic fragmentation. It can become a spiritual trap, a way to simulate connection without ever arriving. The wisdom of spiritual traditions across cultures always points toward clarity, awareness, and communion with the divine. Alcohol, in contrast, muddies the water. To truly break free from the illusions that alcohol perpetuates, one must see the truth beneath the desire, the longing to return to source. That realization is the first spark of transformation. It marks the beginning of a journey away from surface pleasure and into deeper purpose. Turning that unconscious craving into conscious pursuit is what leads to awakening. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss content that could shift your path. Like this video and share it with someone who's ready to see things differently. Mystical insights and spiritual warnings. The mystic poet Rumi often spoke of intoxication, but he didn't mean it in the physical sense. His writings use the idea of drunkenness to describe the ecstatic love of the divine. Wine in his verses wasn't just drink, it was the nectar of God's presence, the sweetness of union with the beloved. Be drunk with love, he writes, for love is all that exists. This divine intoxication lifted the soul upward, not into haze, but into ecstasy. Rumi often contrasted this holy intoxication with the empty substitute offered by physical substances, warning seekers not to confuse worldly escape with spiritual elevation. The metaphor was clear. Don't settle for shadows when the light itself is within reach. Intoxication, the spiritual warning. Hidden in wine, Rumi often warned that while physical wine may offer a short-lived escape, it ultimately dulls spiritual perception. Rather than awakening the heart, it veils the soul's vision, blinding it to higher truths. For Rumi, real intoxication had nothing to do with drinking. It came from giving oneself completely to the divine beloved. That surrender lifted the soul beyond worldly limitation and into spiritual ecstasy. In the Sufi tradition Rumi followed, references to drunkenness were symbolic. They expressed a total loss of ego, a merging into divine unity so complete that personal identity dissolves. Physical alcohol, by contrast, was considered a weak and dangerous mimic of that sacred state. It tempts the spiritual seeker with a false version of union, one that only deepens attachment to the material realm. Likewise, Osho, the modern mystic and spiritual teacher, spoke often of the dangers alcohol poses to awareness. For him, staying fully present was the foundation of awakening. He believed alcohol acted like a curtain over consciousness, dulling the senses and pulling people away from their direct experience of reality. He explained that while it might offer the illusion of freedom, alcohol actually creates disconnection. Awareness is the gateway to inner transformation, Osho often said. And alcohol is a thief. It steals your awareness and leaves you wandering blind. To Osho, drinking was like applying anesthesia to the soul. People use it to escape pain rather than face and evolve through it. He taught that the path to liberation lies in turning inward, not away. It demands courage, stillness, and the willingness to meet oneself fully. Tools like meditation help build this presence, while alcohol, he believed, tears it down. To grow spiritually, Osho taught, one must remain clear and grounded. Substances that cloud the mind are seen not as harmless indulgences, but as obstacles that prevent true awakening. Paramahansa Yogananda, revered author of Autobiography of a Yogi and a master of the yogic path, also strongly warned against alcohol. He emphasized the importance of discipline, clarity, and inner calm. He taught that alcohol weakens the power of concentration and disturbs the balance needed for spiritual practice. Yogananda often compared the human mind to a pond stirred by wind. Alcohol, he said, acts like a storm. It agitates the waters, making it impossible to see clearly or reflect divine light. It makes meditation harder and dims the intuitive faculty needed for communion with the divine. Intoxicants destroy the inner harmony between body and soul, he wrote. They conceal the guiding light that leads the soul toward freedom. In his teaching, enlightenment depends on learning to master the senses, not indulge them. Alcohol undermines this process, making the path steeper and more uncertain. Ancient warnings. Across spiritual traditions, across many of the world's sacred traditions, warnings against alcohol appear not as moral judgments, but as wisdom meant to protect the seeker's clarity and inner peace. In Buddhism, avoiding intoxicants is one of the 5 precepts, a basic ethical foundation meant to support mindfulness and compassion. The purpose isn't prohibition for its own sake, but protection of consciousness. The mind must be clear to perceive the nature of reality. Hindu texts like the Manusmriti also caution against drinking. They associate it with the erosion of moral strength, the weakening of willpower, and the loss of spiritual insight. Discipline and balance are essential on the yogic path, and alcohol throws both off course. In Sufism, wine often appears in poetry as a symbol of divine love, but physical wine is discouraged. It's seen as a trap, a distraction, a physical shortcut that actually pulls the seeker further from God, not closer. Jalaluddin Rumi, though using wine imagery often, was clear. The wine that lifts the soul is spiritual devotion, not fermented drink. In early Christian Gnostic texts, the wine of the world is a symbol for worldly pleasures that entangle the soul. These writings stress the importance of purity and vigilance, warning that indulgence in physical intoxication steers one away from divine purpose. In Gnostic thought, real wine is gnosis, the deep living knowledge of the divine. This knowledge frees the soul from suffering. Alcohol does the opposite. In the Bible, wine occupies a curious space, both sacred and cautionary. It's central to the Eucharist, representing the blood of Christ and the covenant of eternal life. Yet elsewhere, excessive drinking is strongly condemned. Proverbs 20:1 says, "Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived by it is not wise." This dual role highlights alcohol's symbolic paradox. It can point to divine communion or to spiritual detachment. The difference lies in intention, use, and awareness. In alchemical and esoteric traditions, wine often appears as a metaphor for the elixir of life, the substance that uplifts the soul and transforms consciousness. But here too, it is not literal wine. It's a sacred symbol, the joy, clarity, and expansion that come from spiritual realization. The danger, then, is in confusing the physical with the spiritual. When people seek divine union through material substances, they mistake shadow for light. The real wine is divine grace and energy that intoxicates not by dulling but by awakening. What is divine intoxication? Spiritual or divine intoxication refers to a state of overwhelming bliss, unity, and joy that arises in deep communion with the divine. It is a conscious elevation beyond the ego, a direct experience of boundless love and sacred presence. Mystics, from every path, describe this as the ultimate destination of spiritual life. Rumi often spoke of being drunk on the wine of love, losing himself entirely in the embrace of the beloved. This kind of intoxication is not an escape from reality, but an expansion into its deepest truth. Rather than dulling the senses, this spiritual state enhances awareness. It reveals the interconnection of all life. It is full-spectrum consciousness, not numbed but wide awake. Physical intoxication through substances, like alcohol, is a mere imitation. Where divine ecstasy leads to peace and insight, physical intoxication often results in disorientation and dependence. Real spiritual inebriation doesn't require anything external. It arises from deep inner transformation, through surrender, presence, and devotion. It is the fruit of spiritual discipline, not chemical reaction. Mystics throughout history have laid out clear paths toward this sacred state. Practices like meditation still the mind, allowing one toe tune into divine frequency. Chanting, prayer, and sacred song open the heart and lift the soul. Acts of kindness and selfless service dissolve ego boundaries and create space for divine love to enter. Hafez, the beloved Persian poet, expressed the essence of this mystery beautifully. I am a hole in a flute that the Christ's breath moves through. Listen to this music. In that simple image, Hafez captures the essence of divine intoxication, complete surrender. When the self becomes transparent, divine grace plays its melody through us. It is not about control, it's about letting go. It is time now to lift the veil, to recognize the illusions that have kept us bound, and to return to our sacred origin. If you've made it to this point, your spirit is already being called towards something higher. The next chapter of your spiritual journey begins now. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Together we can remember what they hoped we'd forget.